The derelict station. The discovery in the void. Captain Elena Marsh floated through the wreckage of what was once humanity's greatest achievement. The Exodus station, a massive space habitat designed to house 10,000 souls, now spun lifeless through the darkness between stars. She was the only one left alive. 3 months ago, a cascade failure in the station's quantum reactor had triggered an explosion that tore through the habitat rings. Elena had been in the engineering bay, sealed behind emergency bulkheads when disaster struck. She survived. Everyone else didn't. Now, she drifted through corridors filled with frozen air and silent machines. Her suit's oxygen gauge blinked red. 72 hours of air remained. After that, she would join the others in the eternal cold. Taking stock of nothing. Elena refused to accept death quietly. She was an engineer, trained to solve problems that seemed impossible. This was just another problem, even if the odds were astronomically against her. She made her way to the main engineering deck, using her helmet light to navigate through the darkness. The station's backup power was completely dead. The reactor was beyond repair, its core shattered into radioactive fragments. The escape pods had all launched automatically during the disaster, carrying no one but empty seats into the void. What did she have? Elena took inventory methodically, fighting back the despair that threatened to overwhelm her. The station itself was enormous, spanning 3 kilometers from end to end. Millions of tons of metal, plastic, composite materials, and sophisticated technology. All of it useless without power. She had the engineering bay's tool storage, mostly intact. Welding equipment, cutting lasers, fabrication machines, and diagnostic tools. She had the fabrication lab in Section 7, if she could reach it. She had the hydroponic gardens, now frozen solid but possibly containing seeds. And she had knowledge, years of training in spacecraft engineering and system design. The impossible plan. For 3 days, Elena worked frantically, knowing each breath brought her closer to suffocation. She couldn't repair the station. That would take years and resources she didn't have. But she didn't need to repair it. She needed to escape it. The idea formed slowly, born from desperation and engineering instinct. She couldn't use the escape pods that were gone. She couldn't call for help because no one would arrive in time. But she could build something new. The station's solar panels were still functional, just disconnected from the destroyed reactor. If she could reroute power directly to a small section, she could run essential systems. The communications array was damaged but not destroyed. If she could repair it, she might send a distress signal that would reach someone, eventually. But that wasn't enough. Even if her signal reached a colony, rescue could take months or years. She needed a way to save herself. Elena's eyes fell on the cargo bay. Inside were dozens of shipping containers, supply modules meant for the colony world they never reached. And among them, she knew, were the components for an emergency shelter system. Prefabricated modules designed to be deployed on hostile worlds. What if she could turn those modules into a ship? Building from broken pieces. The work was brutal. Elena pushed herself to the edge of exhaustion, sleeping only when her body forced her to stop. She had extended her air supply by connecting her suit to the station's emergency oxygen reserves, buying herself time. First, she restored power to a small section of the station. She cannibalized solar panels from the outer hull, disconnecting them carefully and dragging them through corridors to the engineering bay. With power restored, she could run the fabrication machines and life support systems in one pressurized section. Next came the hull. The emergency shelter modules were designed to lock together, creating airtight seals. Elena reprogrammed the fabrication machines to modify the modules, adding reinforcement and creating a basic spacecraft frame. It looked nothing like a proper ship, more like a collection of rectangular boxes welded together, but the seals held when she tested them. The propulsion system was the hardest challenge. The station's thrusters were too large and too damaged to use. Instead, Elena stripped smaller maneuvering thrusters from maintenance pods and repair drones. She mounted 12 of them on her makeshift vessel, arranged in a configuration that would provide thrust and steering. For fuel, she used the station's reserve hydrogen tanks, meant for the fusion reactor. The thrusters weren't designed to burn hydrogen, but Elena modified them, creating crude combustion chambers that would work long enough to get her somewhere, anywhere with people. The life support gamble. The ship's life support was a nightmare of improvisation. Elena cannibalized atmospheric processors from 3 different sections of the station, combining their components into a single system small enough to fit in her tiny vessel. She tested it obsessively, checking every seal, every filter, every chemical scrubber. The system would recycle her air and water, but only for so long. She calculated that she had enough consumables for 90 days, maybe 100 if she rationed carefully. After that, the filters would clog, the chemicals would be exhausted, and she would slowly suffocate. 90 days to reach help. It would have to be enough. The navigation problem. Elena stood before the communications array she had painstakingly repaired. She had sent distress signals in every direction, automated messages that would repeat endlessly. But she couldn't wait for rescue. She needed to go to them. The nearest inhabited system was Alpha Centauri, 43 trillion kilometers away. Her improvised ship could accelerate to perhaps 5% of light speed if everything worked perfectly. That meant a journey of 8 years. She didn't have 8 years of supplies. She didn't have 8 months. But there was another option. 3 months away at maximum acceleration, there was a shipping lane. Automated cargo vessels passed through that region regularly, traveling between the outer colonies and the inner worlds. If she could reach that lane, she could intercept a ship, board it, and signal for help. 3 months. She had enough supplies for 3 months, barely. Elena set the navigation computer, using star charts salvaged from the station's database. Her ship's sensors were basic, cobbled together from maintenance scanners and docking equipment, but they would have to do. Launch day. Elena sealed herself inside her creation. The vessel had no name, no proper designation. It was simply a collection of spare parts and desperate hope held together by welds and prayer. She had loaded everything she might need: tools, spare parts, emergency rations, water recycling equipment, and medical supplies. The cargo area was so cramped she could barely move, but every cubic centimeter was precious. The control panel before her was a mess of repurposed displays and manual switches. There was no artificial gravity, no comfortable crew quarters, no redundant safety systems. If something broke, she would have to fix it while wearing her pressure suit in zero gravity. Elena initiated the launch sequence. The magnetic clamps holding her ship to the station released with a metallic clang that echoed through the hull. She fired the positioning thrusters, moving slowly away from the massive derelict that had been her home. When she was clear, she ignited the main engines. The acceleration pressed her against the pilot seat, a brutal force that made her bones ache. The thrust wasn't smooth like proper spacecraft engines. It was rough, violent, and barely controlled. But it worked. Her ship was moving, building speed, leaving the dead station behind. Through the viewport, Elena watched the Exodus station shrink into the distance. 10,000 people had died there. She was the only one who escaped. The only one who refused to give up. The station disappeared, becoming just another point of light among the infinite stars. Elena turned her attention to the journey ahead. 3 months to reach the shipping lane. 3 months of keeping her failing systems running. 3 months of survival against impossible odds. She was alone in the dark, flying through space in a ship that should never have worked. But Elena Marsh was an engineer. And engineers don't give up. The journey had begun, the shipping lane. Systems failing. Day 47. Elena floated in the cramped cabin of her improvised vessel, watching the oxygen scrubber cycle through its cleaning process for the 3rd time that hour. The unit was struggling. She could hear it in the labored whir of its fans and see it in the amber warning lights flickering across the control panel. The journey had been harder than she calculated. The ship that should never have flown was falling apart around her, one system at a time. First, the water recycler had developed a leak, forcing her to ration her drinking water to less than a liter per day. Then 2 of the 12 thrusters had failed, throwing off her navigation and forcing her to recalculate her trajectory. The hull had developed microfractures from thermal stress, requiring her to spend 3 terrifying days in her pressure suit while she applied sealant patches from the outside. But she was still alive. Still moving. Still fighting. The math of survival. Elena pulled up the navigation display, studying the trajectory calculations with growing concern. She was behind schedule. The thruster failures had cost her speed and required a longer, more fuel-intensive course correction. Instead of reaching the shipping lane in 90 days, she now estimated 107 days. She didn't have 107 days of supplies. The oxygen scrubber would fail completely in 60 days. She could extend that by sleeping more, reducing her physical activity to almost nothing, but that would only buy her perhaps 15 more days. After that, the carbon dioxide would build up, and she would slowly lose consciousness. The food situation was equally dire. She had been rationing carefully, but the physical demands of constant repairs had burned through her calories faster than planned. At current consumption, she would run out in 70 days. The numbers didn't lie. She would die before reaching the shipping lane unless something changed. Creative engineering. Elena refused to accept the math. There had to be another way. She had built a spacecraft from wreckage. Surely she could extend her supplies long enough to survive. She started with the oxygen problem. The scrubber used chemical filters to remove carbon dioxide from the air. Once the chemicals were exhausted, the scrubber would fail. But what if she could regenerate the filters? For 3 days, Elena experimented with the ship's limited resources. She used the fabrication tool she had brought from the station, a small 3D printer capable of producing basic parts. She disassembled equipment she didn't absolutely need, extracting chemicals and materials. She even considered venting atmosphere to create pressure differentials that might aid filtration. Finally, she found a solution. By heating the exhausted filters to extreme temperatures using jury-rigged heating elements from the ship's thermal control system, she could drive off the captured carbon dioxide and partially regenerate the filters. It wasn't perfect. Each regeneration cycle was less effective than the last. But it would buy her an extra 30 days. The signal. Day 63. Elena was running on fumes, both literally and figuratively. The ship's systems were barely functional. She had repaired the same components so many times that she was now repairing her repairs. The hull patches had patches. The jury-rigged solutions had become permanent fixtures held together by hope and determination. She was tired, deeply tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. The isolation was crushing. Alone in the dark for 2 months, with only the sound of failing machinery for company. She spoke to herself constantly, narrating her actions, just to hear a human voice. Then, on day 63, the communications system detected something. A signal. Faint, distant, but unmistakably artificial. A transponder beacon from a cargo vessel. Elena's hand shook as she analyzed the signal. The ship was in the shipping lane, exactly where she had predicted. But it was moving away from her, traveling along its programmed route at high speed. She calculated intercept trajectories frantically. Even burning all her remaining fuel, she couldn't catch the cargo ship. It was too fast, too far ahead. She would pass within 100,000 kilometers, close by space standards but impossibly far for her damaged vessel. Unless she did something desperate. The gamble. Elena stared at the thruster controls. She had 10 functioning thrusters left. If she burned them all simultaneously at maximum power, she could achieve a brief burst of incredible acceleration. Enough to change her trajectory significantly. The problem was that the thrusters weren't designed for that kind of stress. The fuel lines would probably rupture. The thrust chambers might explode. The entire ship could shake itself apart under the acceleration forces. But if she didn't try, she would drift past the cargo ship and continue into empty space, where she would eventually die when her supplies ran out. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Elena secured everything that could move, strapping herself into the pilot seat with every available restraint. She routed all remaining power to the thrusters and disabled the safety protocols that would normally prevent such dangerous operations. Her finger hovered over the ignition control. This was it. Everything she had survived, everything she had built, all came down to this moment. Either the ship would hold together long enough to intercept the cargo vessel, or it would explode, and she would die instantly instead of slowly. Elena pressed the button. The burn. The acceleration was brutal beyond anything she had experienced. 10 thrusters firing at maximum power, pushing the improvised spacecraft far beyond its design limits. The hull groaned and shrieked. Warning alarms blared from every system. The cabin filled with the smell of burning insulation and superheated metal. Elena couldn't breathe against the G-forces crushing her chest. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel as blood drained from her brain. She felt ribs cracking under the strain. Then, impossibly, the ship held together. The thrusters burned for 47 seconds before 3 of them exploded simultaneously, sending shrapnel tearing through the hull. The remaining thrusters cut out automatically as fuel lines ruptured and pressure dropped. But 47 seconds had been enough. Elena gasped for air, her body screaming in pain. The cabin was depressurizing through a dozen new holes. Emergency sealant foam was spraying automatically, trying to patch the breaches. She grabbed her helmet, sealing her suit with shaking hands as the cabin atmosphere vented into space. Through the viewport, she could see the cargo ship. It was close now, growing larger. Her desperate burn had changed her trajectory enough. She would pass within kilometers instead of thousands of kilometers. The final challenge. The cargo ship was enormous, a kilometer-long automated freighter carrying supplies between colonies. It had no crew, just a simple AI maintaining the vessel during its journey. It wouldn't respond to her signals or alter course. It was simply following its programmed route, indifferent to her survival. Elena had one chance. One option remaining. She used her suit's maneuvering jets to exit the dying wreckage of her ship. The vessel that had carried her so far was now beyond saving, venting atmosphere and fuel, its systems failing catastrophically. But it had done its job. It had brought her close enough. She flew through the void, a single human in a pressure suit, crossing the space between vessels. The cargo ship grew larger, its hull a vast wall of metal approaching at terrifying speed. Elena activated the magnetic grapples on her suit and aimed for the hull. If she missed, if the magnets didn't hold, she would bounce off and drift into space with no way to return. She hit the hull hard enough to crack her faceplate. The magnets engaged, locking her to the metal surface. She was aboard. Survival. It took Elena 6 hours to find an airlock and override its controls. 6 hours of working in a damaged pressure suit, her oxygen running critically low, her body broken and exhausted. But she made it. The airlock cycled. Atmosphere flooded the chamber. Elena removed her helmet and breathed real air for the first time in months. She had done it. Against impossible odds, with nothing but engineering knowledge and determination, she had escaped the dead station, built a spacecraft from debris, and survived a 3-month journey through space. She had intercepted a moving vessel and saved herself. The cargo ship's simple AI, detecting a human presence, automatically sent a distress signal and diverted to the nearest colony. Rescue was coming. Elena collapsed on the floor of the airlock, every muscle trembling, tears streaming down her face. She had survived. Against all odds, against every rational calculation, she had survived.